had a gut feeling that my wife was secretly planning to divorce me, so I decided to protect myself by moving all my assets beforehand. Just 2 weeks later, she went ahead and filed for divorce, but when her entire plan unexpectedly backfired, she panicked and tried to backtrack on everything she'd done. It started small, almost too subtle to notice at first. A few late nights here, a few vague explanations there. She told me she had extra work, that her boss needed her, and I believed her because that's what love does, it blinds you with trust. But over time, those late nights became routine, and the warmth between us began to cool. I'd sit at the dinner table waiting, food turning cold, phone silent, pretending not to check the clock every few minutes. When she finally walked in, she'd smile faintly, tired, distracted, her eyes not meeting mine for more than a second. I tried to tell myself it was stress, maybe burnout, maybe something temporary. But deep down, a quiet unease started to grow, a whisper in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. I remember one evening when she got a message, and I caught the reflection of her phone lighting up on the window beside her. She smiled at it, not the polite smile you give to a coworker, but that soft, private kind of smile. My chest tightened, but I stayed silent. You don't want to believe the worst about someone you love. You convince yourself you're imagining things, that maybe you're being paranoid. So I pushed the thought away, swallowed the suspicion, and told myself to trust her. But trust feels different when it's one-sided. It becomes heavy, suffocating even. Every laugh she had on her phone felt like a knife twisting deeper. Every time she locked her screen a little faster, my doubts grew a little louder. I didn't confront her then. I wasn't ready. I just watched quietly as the woman I thought I knew started slipping away, piece by piece, without even realizing she was leaving me behind. The feeling wouldn't leave me. It clung to me like a shadow that followed everywhere I went, whispering that something was wrong even when everything seemed normal on the surface. I'd wake up beside her, look at her sleeping face, and wonder when exactly the distance began. She still said good morning, still kissed my cheek before leaving, but it all felt mechanical, like she was following a script she no longer believed in. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself that I was just being insecure, but my gut kept screaming louder than logic ever could. Every small thing started to look suspicious. Her phone, always face down. The sudden habit of taking calls in another room. The way she started dressing up more, saying she wanted to feel good about herself, though she never cared much about that before. I noticed she laughed more at her phone than she did at my jokes. I started watching her body language, the way her smile faded when she saw me walk into the room, how her tone changed mid-conversation, how she suddenly had secrets. I wanted to confront her so many times, but the words froze in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if I pushed her further away? So I waited, hoping the truth would reveal itself without me having to dig for it. But deep down, I knew, intuition is never wrong. The woman I loved was slipping into someone else's world, and I was just an unwanted witness. I started losing sleep, replaying every conversation, every smile, every lie I didn't see coming. The more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the clearer it became. Something was breaking, slowly but surely, and pretending not to notice didn't make it hurt any less. The distance between us grew, quiet but sharp, like a knife that didn't cut all at once but sliced deeper each day. We still lived under the same roof, shared the same space, but the connection that once made everything feel alive had faded into a dull routine. Our conversations became short, cold, and practical, just words exchanged to fill silence. Did you pay the bill? What's for dinner? Good night. No laughter, no warmth, no spark. It was strange how a home full of memories could start to feel like a hotel, temporary, lifeless, and heavy with unspoken tension. I'd try to bring back old habits, small things like asking about her day or making her coffee the way she liked it, but she'd just mumble a thank you without looking up. Her eyes were always elsewhere, as if she lived in a world I no longer belonged to. Even sitting beside her felt like sitting next to a ghost. I missed her voice, her laughter, her little quirks that used to make the house feel alive. Now, even her silence felt rehearsed. I began to notice how quickly she ended conversations, how often she looked at the clock when we talked, like she couldn't wait for it to be over. The bed we once shared felt colder too. She'd sleep facing away from me, and sometimes I'd just lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering what changed, when it changed, and why I didn't see it coming. I tried to convince myself that every relationship goes through quiet phases, that maybe she was just tired or distracted, but deep down, I already knew. Love doesn't fade this way by accident. Something else was taking her attention, something I couldn't compete with because I didn't even know what it was yet. One night, everything I had been trying to ignore suddenly became impossible to overlook. She was sitting on the couch, her back slightly turned, her voice low. I was walking past, pretending to head to the kitchen, when I heard her whisper, "Not yet." It was just 2 words, but they hit me like a brick. My body froze mid-step. I tried to act normal, quietly grabbing a glass of water, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. When I turned around, she looked up, startled, almost guilty, and immediately locked her screen. Her hand trembled slightly, but she forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just work," she said too quickly. That word, *work*, had become her favorite excuse lately, and it was starting to lose its meaning. She got up, walked past me, and went straight to the bedroom. I stood there, still, the air heavy and thick with realization. Not yet. What did that even mean? Not yet for what? My mind spiraled with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I replayed that moment 100 times that night, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me, her phone tightly clutched in her hand. I could feel the distance between us even in silence, a wall made of secrets and half-truths. The next day, I watched her more closely, noticing every small detail, the nervous glances, the quick phone checks, the sudden mood changes whenever I got too close. That one phrase had opened a door I couldn't close again. From that moment on, trust was no longer natural. It was forced, fragile, and breaking a little more each day. I didn't say anything yet, but deep down, I knew something was coming. The signs were no longer whispers. They were right in front of me, loud and undeniable. I started noticing patterns, little inconsistencies that didn't fit together no matter how much I tried to make them. She suddenly changed her phone password, something she had never done before. When I asked about it, she shrugged and said it was for security reasons, but the way she avoided my eyes told me there was more. Her bank notifications stopped popping up on our shared email, and when I asked her about money transfers, she brushed it off with a laugh, saying I was being paranoid. She began spending more time catching up with friends I had never met and coming home with that same tired excuse of work dinners. Every story she told felt rehearsed, like lines she had practiced in front of a mirror. I started checking small details, the mileage on her car, the receipts in her purse, the tone in her voice when I mentioned our future. It was all shifting. She used to talk about vacations, kids, growing old together. Now she only talked about space, freedom, independence. At first, I thought maybe she was just going through a phase, but then I overheard her on the phone again, talking softly, cautiously, like someone walking through a minefield. I couldn't catch much, but I heard her say something about timing and being ready. That's when the puzzle started fitting together in the worst way possible. She wasn't just distant, she was planning something big. My heart sank when I realized what it might be. Divorce. The word alone made my chest tighten. I didn't want to believe it, but my instincts wouldn't stop screaming. I knew she was preparing for an exit, and I had no idea how long I had before she made her move. Once the idea settled in my mind that she might be planning to leave, I couldn't think about anything else. Every moment around her felt like walking on cracked glass, pretending not to notice the pieces breaking beneath my feet. I knew I had to do something, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. If she was preparing for divorce, she was likely already one step ahead of me. I'd heard stories, people losing everything because they trusted too much, because they assumed love was protection. So, one morning, after she left for work, I called a lawyer. I didn't even know what to say at first. My voice shook as I explained that I suspected my wife was planning a divorce and that I needed advice. The lawyer listened patiently, then said something that sent a chill down my spine. If you're right, you have very little time to protect yourself. Start moving assets discreetly. Don't confront her yet. His words felt cold, but real. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about survival. That day, I went through every shared account, every piece of property, every joint asset we had. I started quietly moving what I could, legally and carefully, making sure it wouldn't raise suspicion. Each click, each transfer, felt like I was closing a door that once kept us safe together. I hated myself for it, but I knew I couldn't just sit there waiting for her to strike first. At night, when she came home and smiled like nothing was wrong, I looked at her differently. She had no idea what I was doing, and I had no idea what she was planning. We were both playing a silent game, pretending everything was fine while preparing for the moment one of us would finally say goodbye. I spent the next few days quietly putting everything into motion. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friend, because I knew one wrong word could ruin everything. I went through accounts, documents, and investments like a man possessed, moving what I could and securing the rest under my name. It wasn't about greed, it was about protection. I had worked my entire life for what we had built, and I refused to lose it to a plan built on betrayal. Every transfer I made came with a sting of guilt, but I swallowed it down, reminding myself that she had already made her choice long before I did this. I didn't do anything illegal, nothing underhanded, just smart, quiet moves to keep myself from being blindsided. I even set up a private account, one she didn't know existed, just in case things got ugly. My hands would shake as I filled out forms, the reality of it all sinking in with every signature. This wasn't a movie. This was my life unraveling in real time. Each step I took felt like another piece of my marriage dying. When I looked at her across the dinner table that week, smiling faintly, pretending everything was fine, it almost broke me. She laughed at something on her phone, completely unaware that I was already preparing for the fallout she thought she'd control. I wasn't angry anymore, just numb. I knew that once the truth came out, she'd see me as the villain. Maybe I'd even look like one. But deep down, I knew I was just defending myself before it was too late. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted safety. Still, there was a heavy sadness in knowing that love had turned into strategy, and trust had become a battlefield. After I secured everything and quietly made my moves, there was a strange calm that settled over the house. For the first time in weeks, she seemed almost happy. She smiled more, cooked dinner again, even started asking about my day like she used to. It was disarming, confusing even. Part of me wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong all along, that maybe she'd just been stressed, and we were finally finding our way back to each other. The warmth in her tone, the sudden affection, it felt like a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But something about it felt rehearsed, like a play being performed just for me. I noticed how she'd glance at me, watching for reactions, gauging whether I suspected anything. It wasn't love I saw in her eyes, it was calculation. Still, I played along, smiling back, pretending to be the oblivious husband she probably thought I was. The nights became lighter, conversations easier, and for a moment, I almost let myself relax. But deep down, I knew this peace wasn't real. It was the calm before the storm, the kind of silence that comes right before something big and devastating. I started to see the small cracks in her act, the way her hands trembled when she texted, the nervous laughter when I asked about her work dinners. She thought she was fooling me, but all she was doing was confirming what I already knew. She was preparing for her next move. And so was I. I kept my mask on, kept my tone soft, and waited. Every good morning, every gentle touch, every fake smile she gave me only reminded me of what was coming. She thought she was in control of the game, but soon, she'd realize she wasn't the only one playing. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when nothing feels different until everything suddenly changes. I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with coffee from her favorite cafe. The house was quiet, a little too quiet. I walked in, set the cups down on the counter, and that's when I saw it, an envelope lying neatly on the dining table, my name written across it in her handwriting. My stomach dropped before I even touched it. The air felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. I picked it up, opened it slowly, and there it was, divorce papers. I just stood there for a while, staring at them, my hands trembling. There was no letter, no explanation, no emotional closure, just cold legal documents that turned years of love and memories into a transaction. The woman I had built my life around had ended it with a stack of papers and a signature. A strange calm washed over me, the kind that doesn't come from peace but from shock. When she came home later, she didn't look surprised to see me holding the papers. She dropped her keys, sighed softly, and said, "I didn't want to do this like this, but it's for the best." Her tone was rehearsed, detached, like she'd been preparing for this speech for weeks. I wanted to yell, to ask her why, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just nodded slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on me. She mistook my silence for defeat, probably thinking her plan had worked exactly as she hoped. But deep down, I wasn't broken. I was just empty. The game she thought she was winning had only just begun, and she didn't realize yet that I was no longer the same man she thought she could betray. She stood there across the room, arms crossed, her expression calm but cold, like she had practiced this moment over and over in her head. I could tell she had expected tears, maybe anger, maybe even begging, but all she got was silence. When she realized I wasn't going to argue, her confidence faltered for just a second. "It's for the best," she repeated, this time softer, almost uncertain. I could hear the faint tremor in her voice, but she quickly masked it with that same detached composure. I wanted to ask her how she could throw away everything we had built together so easily, but the words stuck in my throat. It was like arguing with a stranger wearing the face of the woman I used to love. So I just said, "If that's what you want." The look on her face was priceless, confusion mixed with frustration. She clearly hadn't expected me to accept it so easily. She wanted a reaction, maybe even a fight, something to make her feel justified. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I signed the papers she brought, my hand steady even though my heart was breaking. She looked almost disappointed, like her victory suddenly felt hollow. "You'll see, it's better this way," she said while gathering her things, avoiding eye contact. I simply nodded again. Deep down, I already knew what she didn't, that the assets she thought she was taking with her were no longer within her reach. The silence between us was deafening, thick with finality. As she walked out that door, a part of me shattered, but another part felt strangely calm. She thought she had ended things on her terms, but she had no idea that the move she made had already backfired before she even placed her final piece. The next morning, I woke up to a house that felt emptier than it ever had before. Her clothes were gone, the drawers half open, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the space she used to occupy, trying to understand how something that once felt so permanent could vanish overnight. There was no note, no apology, no trace of remorse, just absence. But beneath the ache, there was also a strange sense of power, a quiet reassurance that I had done the right thing by moving my assets before she filed. She had expected me to be blindsided, to crumble under the weight of shock and confusion. Instead, I was prepared. I called my lawyer that morning, explained what had happened, and he simply said, "You did well. Now let her make her move." His calmness grounded me. Over the next few days, I watched from a distance as her plans started to unfold. She sent messages, cold, formal ones, asking about property division and accounts, clearly expecting to have the upper hand. When she realized everything had already been transferred and secured, her tone changed from confident to desperate. I didn't respond right away. I wanted her to feel the same uncertainty she had forced on me. It was cruel, maybe, but fair. Every time my phone buzzed with another message from her, I could almost hear the panic behind her words. The woman who had thought she could manipulate me into losing everything was finally realizing that the tables had turned. I wasn't the naive husband anymore. I was the man who had quietly taken back control, even as my heart still struggled to accept the reality of what she had done. Her panic started subtly at first, hidden behind polite, carefully worded messages. She asked if we could revisit the asset distribution and handle things fairly, but I could read the desperation behind her professionalism. It didn't take long before her tone cracked. The messages turned from calm requests to accusations, claiming I had betrayed her trust and acted out of spite. The irony made me laugh bitterly. She was the one who tried to ambush me, yet now she played the victim when her plan collapsed. My lawyer advised me to stay silent, to let her emotions burn themselves out before responding. So I did. Days passed with a growing storm of texts, emails, and even calls from unknown numbers that I knew were hers. The woman who once thought she held all the power was unraveling piece by piece. Then, one night, she showed up at my doorstep. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling between anger and regret. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, as if I were the one who betrayed her. I didn't yell back. I just looked at her and said quietly, "I did what I had to do." That simple sentence broke her. She started pacing, tears streaming down her face, ranting about how she didn't expect things to go this way, how she thought she'd be fine, how she thought I wouldn't notice anything until it was too late. Her voice cracked with the weight of her own guilt, though she tried to hide it under anger. In that moment, I didn't feel pity or satisfaction, just exhaustion. Everything she said only confirmed what I already knew. Her plan had backfired completely. She wasn't in control anymore. She was watching the empire of lies she'd built crumble right in front of her. She stood in the doorway, trembling with anger, confusion, and something that looked a lot like fear. For the first time, the confidence she always wore like armor was gone. Her voice was shaky as she tried to make sense of how everything had turned against her. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, almost to herself. I didn't answer. The silence between us said more than words ever could. She looked around the house as if searching for proof that she still had control over something, but everything about that moment made it clear she had lost. Her plan, the careful deception, the quiet manipulation, it had all collapsed before her eyes. When I finally spoke, my tone was steady, not cruel, just final. "You planned to destroy me, and you're angry that I didn't let you." Her lip quivered, and she tried to defend herself, saying she was confused, that she had been thinking about leaving but didn't mean to hurt me. I didn't buy it. You don't accidentally file for divorce. You don't accidentally plan financial betrayal. What she really meant was that she didn't expect to lose. Her anger turned into a meltdown, her words becoming frantic and inconsistent. She accused me of being manipulative, heartless, even controlling, all the things she herself had been. Watching her unravel was painful, but not for the reason she thought. I wasn't angry anymore. I was mourning the woman I thought I'd known, realizing she had been gone long before this confrontation. When she finally broke down completely, crying and saying she didn't know what to do now, I just stood there. There was nothing left to say. The damage was done, the trust dead, and all that remained between us was the haunting silence of a love that had turned to ashes. She sank onto the couch, her tears coming faster now, smudging the mascara that once made her eyes look so sharp and confident. Between gasps, she tried to explain herself, saying she thought she was doing the right thing and that she just wanted control back. I listened quietly, not because I believed her, but because I needed to hear how far she would go to rewrite the story. She blamed stress, misunderstandings, even claimed that people had influenced her decisions. But every excuse only made it clearer that she wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she failed. I watched as the realization hit her that there was no coming back from this. The documents were signed, the assets were secured, and the mask she'd worn so perfectly had shattered beyond repair. Her words turned into sobs, and then she said something that froze me completely. "I didn't think you'd ever stop trusting me." That was the moment everything made sense. She had counted on my loyalty, my love, my blind faith. She thought I would never see through her, that she could manipulate me and still keep my affection. But she underestimated the quiet strength of a man who'd been pushed too far. When she reached out, trying to touch my hand, I stepped back. "You made your choice," I said softly. "Now you have to live with it." Her face crumpled at those words. It wasn't anger I saw anymore. It was realization. She had gambled everything, and now she was left with nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. She looked around the room one last time, like she was trying to find the pieces of the life she had thrown away, but there was nothing left to find. Only emptiness and regret. She sat there in complete silence after that, her sobs slowly turning into soft, uneven breaths. I could see the storm inside her eyes fading into a hollow kind of acceptance. She wasn't angry anymore. She was defeated. For years, she had controlled every argument, every decision, every emotional turn in our relationship, but now she had no power left to wield. I could almost feel her realizing that the game she'd been playing wasn't just lost. It had destroyed everything around her, including herself. After a long pause, she whispered, "Can we fix this?" The words hit me like a dagger because a part of me still wished it were possible, but the rational side of me knew better. There are some things that can't be repaired once they've been broken, especially trust. I looked at her, not with hatred, but with a quiet sadness. "You didn't want to fix it," I said. "You wanted to win." Her face twisted with guilt, and she buried her face in her hands, muttering how she had made a mistake, how she didn't think it would go this far. I wanted to tell her that mistakes happen, that people can change, but this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. She had planned everything, calculated every move, and only regretted it once she realized she couldn't control the outcome. When she finally looked up, her voice was small, almost childlike, as she asked, "What do I do now?" I didn't have an answer for her. I simply said, "You move on." That was the hardest thing I had ever said, but it was the truth. The love I once felt was gone, replaced by a quiet emptiness. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't my wife anymore. She was a stranger who had finally met the consequences of her own betrayal. After she left that night, the silence in the house felt unbearable. Every room carried traces of her perfume, her laugh echoing faintly in my memory, the ghost of her presence clinging to the air like dust that refused to settle. For years, this place had been ours, a home built on promises we once believed were unbreakable, and now it felt like a museum of lies. I walked through the rooms, touching the things we'd bought together, and for the first time, they felt meaningless. The bed we shared seemed colder, the kitchen quieter, and the pictures on the wall looked like they belonged to strangers. I sat down and tried to process everything, but my mind kept replaying the confrontation, her words, her tears, the moment she realized she had lost control. Part of me expected to feel relief, but instead there was just a deep, aching emptiness. I wasn't proud of what I had done. I was simply exhausted. Love had turned into suspicion, and marriage had become a war zone where survival meant losing a piece of yourself. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, first cold and calculating, then broken and defeated. I didn't know which version hurt more. By morning, the reality had settled in completely. It was over. The future we once planned together had vanished, replaced by uncertainty. But beneath the sadness, there was also a quiet strength growing inside me, the realization that I had endured something meant to destroy me, and I was still standing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living in her shadow anymore. The silence that once suffocated me now felt like freedom, painful but pure, like a wound finally beginning to heal. In the days that followed, I started to rebuild a routine, though everything felt different, quieter, slower, heavier. The mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to hear her in the kitchen, humming or talking on the phone, but the silence that greeted me was a reminder that she was truly gone. There were moments when I almost reached for my phone to text her out of habit, before remembering that she wasn't mine to reach anymore. My friends noticed the change in me. Some offered sympathy, others asked questions I didn't want to answer. I kept the details to myself, not out of shame but because I didn't have the energy to relive it all. People would never understand how betrayal feels until they've lived through it, the way it drains you, not just emotionally but spiritually, leaving you hollow but somehow still breathing. I focused on work, kept my head down, and spent nights in the quiet company of my own thoughts. I tried to find meaning in the mess, to understand how love could turn into something so cruel and calculated. But slowly, the anger began to fade, replaced by a strange calm. I realized that holding on to bitterness would only chain me to the past she'd already left behind. So, I started letting go piece by piece. I deleted old photos, stopped checking her social media, and allowed myself to exist without her shadow looming over me. The process hurt, it always does, but there was a strange beauty in reclaiming my solitude. For the first time in years, I was learning who I was without her. And in that stillness, I began to rediscover something she had taken from me long before she left. Peace, fragile but real, blooming quietly where the pain used to live. Weeks passed, and the chaos that had once consumed my life slowly began to settle into something resembling normalcy. The pain didn't disappear, it just dulled, like an old scar that still aches when touched. There were days when I'd catch myself remembering her laugh, the way she used to lean on me during long drives, or the small rituals we had built over the years. Those memories came without warning, cutting through me like glass. But instead of drowning in them, I learned to let them pass, to accept them as fragments of a life that no longer existed. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset bleed across the sky, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. Everything that had happened, all the lies, the manipulation, the heartbreak, had stripped me bare, but it had also shown me something about myself. I wasn't weak for loving her, I was strong for surviving her. That realization was both painful and freeing. I began to see how much of myself I had given up trying to keep her happy, how I had ignored the red flags in the name of love. I started taking small steps toward rebuilding who I was before the marriage, reading again, reconnecting with friends, finding comfort in solitude instead of fearing it. There was still an ache that lingered when I thought about how things ended, but it wasn't as sharp as before. It was more like a quiet reminder of what I'd learned. I no longer wanted revenge or answers. I just wanted peace, and for the first time, I felt like I was getting close to it. The storm she left behind was finally clearing, and though the damage was deep, the sky above me felt open again, limitless and mine. Months had passed since she walked out of my life, and by then, the pain had transformed into something quieter, something I could live with. It no longer consumed me the way it once did. The anger had faded, the shock had dissolved, and all that remained was a strange mixture of acceptance and clarity. I began to see our marriage for what it truly was, not the fairy tale I had convinced myself of, but a fragile illusion that was always destined to break. There were still moments when her memory drifted through my mind, uninvited and bittersweet. Sometimes, I missed her laugh or the comfort of having someone beside me at night, but I didn't miss the person she became, the coldness, the deceit, the manipulation that had turned love into a weapon. I finally understood that losing her wasn't the tragedy I once thought it was. It was liberation, disguised as heartbreak. I had been forced to confront truths I had ignored for years, that love without respect is poison, that trust once broken can never be rebuilt, and that sometimes the person you would have given everything for is the one sent to teach you how to stand alone. Slowly, I found myself smiling again, not because I had forgotten, but because I had survived. I realized that moving on didn't mean erasing the past, it meant refusing to be defined by it. I stopped wondering what she was doing or if she regretted her choices. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had my life back, my peace, and a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and far more guarded. The man she tried to break was gone, and in his place stood someone reborn, not bitter, not vengeful, but finally, completely free. Time, as it always does, moved forward, and with each passing day, the distance between who I was and what happened grew wider. The pain that once defined my nights now felt like an echo, distant, faded, almost unreal. There were moments when I would look back and wonder how I had endured it all, how I managed to survive a love that tried to destroy me. But then I'd remember the silence that followed her departure, the calm that replaced the chaos, and I'd realize that losing her wasn't the end, it was the beginning. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of that betrayal, piece by piece, until I became someone stronger, someone who no longer needed validation from another person to feel whole. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering without breaking. I stopped hating her long ago, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. The past no longer held power over me. It was simply a story, one that had shaped me but didn't define me. One evening, I stood outside watching the stars, and for the first time, I felt a quiet gratitude for everything that had happened. If she hadn't betrayed me, I would never have discovered the strength buried inside me. I would never have learned the value of protecting my heart, of listening to my instincts, of walking away when love turns toxic. The scars remained, but they no longer hurt. They were reminders of lessons learned in fire. I didn't wish her pain or regret. I simply wished her gone, forever out of my life and my thoughts. The chapter that began in suspicion and heartbreak ended not with vengeance or sorrow, but with freedom. And in that stillness, I finally felt it, the peace I had been searching for all along.